So thank you for inviting us and for everyone for joining the session. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to just start off with a sort of set the conversation and then let it go. And I would ask that everybody can just chime in through the chat as you go, so we can kind of bring in questions and follow the conversation there. It's 5 o'clock, so it's a conversation over coffee. I think is the best way to think about this. Since I'm an Ahmedabad. No. So one of the things about this book that I, from my position, find particularly noteworthy or worth looking at is the idea of the unbuilt beyond things which are not able to be built because of practice issues, because of budget or constraints. And I look at that in the context, I tend to be comparative, but when we look at how practice runs here, and both Ambrish and Sameep's practices are maybe what we could call high volume practices. They're generated through building, and I think the Indian architecture profession is something that is largely driven by built works, more so than a lot of other places, due to a lot of reasons: lack of funding for research, lack of a structure for even the kind of conversations that can exist beyond practice outside school. I think we've been developing these conversations within universities more and more in the last 10 years, but in practice there are not enough spaces for discussing the ideologies or the agendas behind practice, even though they exist within the practices that we all have. Whereas when you look at the US or Europe, even where I'm coming from, is that practices are ideologically driven first, critical practices. So you get a body of unbuilt work, you build a voice, and eventually you can get to a point where the practice can build based on that ideology. Now, obviously, but all of these things are more muddy than I'm stating. But this book is trying to sort of change that narrative or change that equation. And I think what I'd like to look at and sort of where I'd like to start the conversation is what is the function of unbuilt for the sake of unbuilt in this kind of practice-driven context? Because we don't necessarily need to follow a path where we go back to another way of doing things where ideology drives practice only, but how can we think about speculation and possibility beyond built projects or interlinked with built projects as a way to respond to some of the sort of magnitude of crises or magnitude of changes that we're facing today? That's a very large question, but I'm gonna open it right there and let you guys go.
Sameep, you go first.
Hey, Ambrish, I was hoping you'd play motivational speaker and begin this entire
thing. That's all Rajesh's.
No, but yeah, I mean, Rajesh's description was so apt. I mean, the fact that, I as a kind of champion tennis player and as a singer, you as a motivational speaker, these are all unbuilt versions of ourselves, right? I mean, in some sense. So I think it was an apt kind of segue. But you know what, I am not completely kind of, let's say, sold on this idea that the unbuilt is in some sense a project in itself. Unbuilt for me also operates to a certain extent through the agency of time, right? I mean, what is unbuilt today as an idea might manifest in a different way through a project that might be more appropriate for that idea. I mean, this happened, for example, we talk about examples that, for instance, even the Temple of Steps, the one that we've recently built in Andhra, was a project that we'd actually begun working on for a different project, different site, different client about 6-7 years ago. But sometimes the unbuilt version of it also is about is a function of time. And I think that's something that that's also kind of important to remember. But of course, we should also kind of distinguish it from the ambition of it being built, right? I mean, that is something that is extremely kind of contingent on the way that we organize our lives and practices. I mean, the difference that Rajesh was talking about from Anupama's practice as opposed to ours, or for that matter, even the I don't know if you've seen these beautiful provocative sketches that Ayaz is kind of putting out off and on Instagram. I mean, obviously they're not buildable, right? But the fact is that they are commentaries on not just architectural aspects of the project, but really it's kind of socio-cultural, it's political kind of connotations as well. And I think within that itself, the unbuilt has tremendous, or the unbuildable has tremendous potential. So I'm not completely convinced about the fact that the unbuilt as a body of work is static, even though we have a book on it. And Rajesh and I have had these kind of arguments off and on. Is what is the thesis that comes out of this? Is the thesis that the unbuilt is necessary for us to kind of build an entire practice on, or is the unbuilt a body of work in itself? What is the position of the unbuilt in the way that we imagine architecture and built environments? I mean, I think I've just kind of maybe muddied the waters a little bit more than I should have. But yeah, anyway, yeah. Ambrish, your turn.
And just to add to that, I mean, the way I interpreted unbuilt was everything that's between, before, after, in between the build. So what's said and what's unsaid. So I did the unsaid bit, and whether it is what comes prior to building. So for instance, Melissa, when you speak about, it's almost sequential. So there's a body of unbuilt, or a repository of unbuilt ideas, which then manifest. Some of those at least inform the built in some way, and each practitioner kind of uses the unbuilt to ideologically sharpen what their values might be, or whatever they aspire to kind of put out there. And to that degree, I think in our context, and I'll speak specifically from my practice and perhaps the larger Indian context, I think from day one at least, and I think again it's very personal for me, the idea of survival has driven the practice. So from day one, I mean, there was no, I just had no, I didn't have the luxury of kind of exploring my values, and it happened alongside. So each project allowed, I mean, and that was again a personal journey for us, is that why are we doing what we're doing, and whether the first project was a bathroom we renovated for someone, or an office we built for a travel agent in a little thing, is somewhere there is where our values started to kind of emerge from. And it's a dynamic, it's an evolving, emergent idea. And so, and a lot of values that we put out there today are actually post-rationalized. We're trying to make sense of what has emerged. And yes, that in turn informs what we do next. So somewhat like what Sameep said about his temple, and perhaps the seeds were planted several years ago somewhere else, and then it germinated at the right point in time. And so this idea of the evolution of the ideology is something that happens concurrent to the building practice, and all the spaces in between, when we have to really put a drawing out there and send it for construction. Up until that point is where the ideology kind of keeps challenging the program, challenging what we are doing, seeing if we can weave it into the built. So that there is, I mean, all of that for me as well exists as the unbuilt, and what leads to the built. And so I don't really see it as separate.
So I think that what's interesting is to look at, to start with, I'll use Sameep, your terms. You're making a distinction between what is unbuilt and what is unbuildable. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, which, and Ambrish, if I'm right on this, you're not engaging with the unbuildable in a sense. Everything that, even the unbuilt, everything is built through the idea of what could be in the future as yet. Is that fair, or?
So the unbuildable bits are the dreams or the values or the aspirations, and which to me does inform the build. So I mean, if you want, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right in terms of the way it manifests itself. That's how it seems, but there is the whole, see, the idea of emotion or the idea of seeing it's. I mean, it might start with an image that's unbuildable, and somewhere that finds it gets translated into a physical manifestation which is buildable. To that degree, you're right. So perhaps we don't have drawings of what's unbuildable in the studio.
No, but I think this is a really, like, it's kind of the conflict of architectural practice. It's the heart of the conflict, right? That we're talking about values, that agendas, things that we're trying to achieve through the architecture, but also recognizing at the same time that through the mode of practice, which is consultancy based, there is a limit to how those values can translate into the buildings, or there needs to be a translation from that agenda to the built work. Does that, Sameep, do you think that you buy that?
Actually, I don't know. Maybe this is a question that's applicable to both of you as well. Do you actually aspire to having work unbuilt? For me, I mean, I want to build the project, right? I mean, I don't come from a position where I'm using the unbuilt as speculation. I want to speculate with the actual test of the kind of let's say the thesis is to actually engage with a real project, right? So I could think through the idea of, again, I'm just sticking with the Temple of Steps because it's, I mean, maybe a little bit more familiar since it's a recent project. But the fact that the void of the kund is in some sense a mirror of the shikhara, the step form stays the same. I mean, I could kind of speculate on that. I could draw that in a variety of ways to kind of think through it. But the actual kind of built experience of that informs you in a way that perhaps the unbuilt speculation might not. So for me personally, I don't aspire to the unbuilt. I mean, that's for kind of building a system of values. The research aspects of my kind of interests and practice are enough, whether it's it's the kind of housing studies that we've done, the book on housing that we've done, or the book on coding that we're doing going further. So for me, the unbuilt aspect or the kind of value building aspect of that one could prescribe to the unbuilt comes from that research aspect. So whether it is research for the sake of research or research for the practice. But I'm interested in application. Yeah, quite frankly, that is, I mean, I clearly kind of, I would be unhappy if a project lies unbuilt. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys feel? I don't know.
Ambrish, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm exactly the same. It's, yeah, I mean, totally.
So we've got a panel of people who are perhaps too like-minded in that way, because that's the thing I always start with when we talk to people about the practice, that we're built. So we spend time building things and research into how to build things. Because I think Sameep, the way you put it is, well, there are lots of opportunities for things to be unbuilt, and we can get into semantic arguments and talk about unbuilding as a factor of taking apart buildings. We have some projects that are like that, and I think that's also a really, particularly with the building stock that we have here and today, there's a lot of unbuilding that goes even into built practices if you're trying to work with existing structures, because especially the kind of structures we have are usually not entirely salvageable. Is that fair to say?
Right.
They require a lot of So then let's keep the conversation in this question of what is the role of Unbuilt within built practice, and not go further, because well, I think if all of us are not disposed towards unbuildable as a polemic or as a speculation, what is the role, like what is the role of these unbuilt notions in practice, and how can we engage, like how do they inform or change the way that we work?
I mean, you know what Ambrish was talking about earlier about the fact that, you know, the unbuilt for him exists till the point that you have to send out a drawing to site. You know, that lifeline, that lifetime of the project, where it is in its sense the most open to influence, to change, to be able to be modulated. And I think that aspect of the well, the unbuilt as an idea is great. But the application, of course, like we've discussed already, I'm just also wondering whether, you know, whether if in some way you could build, you know, the Cedric Price Fun Palace, you know, would it lessen the power of the diagram? Yeah, would that idea be any less? I'm not sure. I mean, you know, I mean, we'll need to kind of maybe think this through. But are there projects that just by their position as a kind of theoretical, or their kind of status as a theoretical position, are more powerful than resulting in an actual built project? Do you think that that exists? I mean, you know, the idea of diagrams, right? I mean, the Bjarking's simplistic oversimplification of the project idea as a simple sketch is one thing, but you know, the kind of notional complexity of the Fun Palace, for instance, is there a way to kind of translate that into an actual project? Maybe in a way of conceptually organizing your thinking about a project, yes. But would you, if you actually try to build the Fun Palace by itself, would it be as potent, you know, an idea anymore? Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering whether this is obviously a kind of a counter argument to whatever we were saying earlier as well. But I don't know. What do you think, Melissa?
What do I think? I thought I'm asking the questions here. No,
it's a conversation. We are friends.
It's a conversation.
I mean, we were having coffee and tea and all of that. So,
very good. Yeah. No, I think that's a. I do think there's a difference. I think that I think that the power, like if we take the Fun Palace in particular, I think the focus would change. And I mean, you can. I was trying to think of a project that might be equivalent to that, but like the Duisburg Nordlandschaft project is one that kind of, I mean, it's got a different agenda, it's got a different sort of theory driven behind it, but it kind of fits that notion. Or even if you look at Parc de la Villette, these ideas of experience. But what and I think what would change is that you lose a bit of you lose. I'm not sure that it's necessarily a disadvantage, but you lose the power of the single agenda or the single authorship, because once you make something, other people can interpret it any way they want. I remember one of my first professors would always say, buildings don't have signs that explain them to you. They have to be apparent. Like, right, when you go into a building, you figure it out. And so I think but that potentially is more power, like collectively, that's more powerful maybe than the single agenda. But in terms of driving arguments or influencing people thinking about what to do, it dilutes it, perhaps.
Ambrish.
I'm kind of lost here. Just trying to...
No, but that's my status normally. Yeah. So you're just now, if you're lost, that's you already.
So I made it this far.
Many levels. Many levels. Zen-like is what Rajesh had said. So, but you know what?
I can just choose to be quiet and.
No, but I mean, I think we should also invite questions. There's someone outside. Someone has comments.
I'm sure
I'm
Viren
sure
has
we're
many.
sure
Yeah, I'm allowed to speak.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Uh,
I don't think if I'm going to put the picture also, I can
yeah, you
do
should put on
that.
your
It's a little
video.
dark.
Yeah. No
Oh,
worries, no worries.
am I visible? Yes, there
Oh
I am.
yeah, completely.
Okay. Okay. I feel that very interesting what Melissa was saying and what Sameep you are saying. I think if we magnify the issue a bit and go deeper into it and look at values, Melissa mentioned values. Now, there could be a time where the architect is facing ideologically a conflict with the existing, first, the political system. That can happen. Or it can happen also that you are not able to execute your work and it remains then unbuilt because it is technically not implementable. Can also happen. To give an example, we all know, say, St. Elias project or the earlier Italian period by, what is this Italian guy's name, who sketches so beautifully of 15th century. I'm just missing his name. What is his name?
I should know that.
Those beautiful black and white sketches.
Piranesi.
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 Mm.
Now, it could happen that Piranesi was technically impaired to build what he thought, but it could happen also that his imaginations were not driven by any functionality, but what Amrish rightly said, by emotions and by imaginations. So there is sometimes not a direct purpose to the unbuilt. It could be driven by a very personal agenda, but it is technically not feasible, or politically it could be incorrect. It could have various reasons that it is not being built. But like Sameep rightly said, Piranesi, I'm definite, would have loved to see his buildings done. And there I would question the idea of something that you start as a thought based on whatever ideology you carry. The very idea is to build it. I don't think you think to make it unbuilt. You will only think as a unbuilt, a sketch like the bus ride. They put it together, but then you can't say it's unbuilt. I would change then the term, because built and unbuilt are strongly correlated. I mean, if you think unbuilt, then you are actually wanting to build it. It is not then built, but so you call it unbuilt. But if I look at bus ride, what they are doing, I think it is, you could call it maybe polemic in architecture. You could call it, actually a sketch of a thought, a philosophy, a thesis that is presented. But the idea of building or unbuilt doesn't arise at all then in that case. I would put it I would postulate that across. For me, built means unbuilt or unbuilt means built. Both are very strongly linked and one impairs the other. But the agenda is certainly to build, like Sameep says.
So what you're basically saying is that, the unbuilt is really a kind of fallout of a process. It doesn't manifest the build, right? I mean, it is not something that is intentional in the sense that, which is what I was actually also kind of saying earlier with Rajesh, that, we were kind of talking about this, about the fact that is there from the entire collection of projects that have been shortlisted by the curatorial committee, is there a clear kind of idea that certain kinds of thought processes lead to more unbuilt projects, or can the unbuilt projects be grouped based on certain kind of contingencies that seem to align? So is there a pattern really, that you can actually see in the book? And maybe Rajesh can also kind of jump in and start answering that question while I leave him out of this. But no, I mean, otherwise, what is the to kind of document projects is, it's great because you need to kind of show projects that might have some kind of prescriptive or some kind of projective value. But beyond that, is there something systemic for us to kind of take away from it? the question is whether there is a kind of systemic that comes out of this collection of projects. Is there something that seems to present? I mean, the academic stuff, yeah. I mean, obviously it's going to be academic, but the unbuilt work that you've seen, I mean, per se, the value of the project itself and its projective capacities is one thing, but as a body of work, is there something that clearly kind of jumps out at you, saying that? I mean, something as stupid as, the larger the scale, the more the unbuilt, it's, something like that. I mean, are there any
No, I think
patterns?
one of the things that's consistent is that competition entries and academic works are infinitely more interesting, at least in terms of those projections. I don't know, I've not thought about this, and yesterday we were discussing, and it's been what, 1.5, 2 years since we selected these projects. So I don't know what you're talking about, Sameep. I can't remember any of the projects. It's so far back. And I don't know if there's
You just missed that entire talk that Rajesh did for 10 minutes about explaining what those projects were. So anyway.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a systemic thing to take away, that this is the that unbuilt work has these sort of tropes or this kind of pattern. But I think generally the competition entries seem to release the architects from the straitjackets that maybe private practice put you into. And academic work as well, they seem to be the most probing and interesting things to look at least for me in the book. And that's probably true for the first edition as well, Rajesh, that I think the competition schemes and I don't know if there were academic schemes selected.
No, there were no academic schemes, because the first version was, everything was buildable, unbuilt.
Right.
Came from architecture practices mostly.
Yeah, I think Ruturaj made the distinction yesterday that there's, the unrealized real project, and then the unbuilt, which is basically just a speculation. And those are generally more interesting. But yeah, I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know if I've not thought about it, whether there's a systemic.
I don't think this makes that statement like Sameep is saying that unbuilt is better, or this unbuilt is.
No, it's not about better. I mean, it's really about what are the characteristics, like Bijoy just said, that competition projects seemed much more interesting. I mean, it's a straightforward kind of understanding of it. So what I'm curious about is, are there commonalities that you see that projects that were let's say more kind of socially kind of inclined, maybe apolitical, didn't get built, or were political, so they didn't get built? I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to see if there are certain criteria that pop out. I mean, that maybe can help you do a third book.
So anyway, there is one question which has come from Anirudh over here. I'm reading that out. So Melissa, I'm allowed to do that?
Yeah, sure. I can't see questions, I guess, on the chat box. You'll have to.
So there are many factors beyond architects that result into translation of a project into a built form, be it financing or labor or a client. Does that necessarily mean a project fails if it remains unbuilt? That is the question from Anirudh for anyone, Sameep or Ambrish, to answer.
Sameep, go for it. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I like I said earlier, it's the unbuilt project is a failure of something, whether it is of something that went wrong at our end, or some other contingency that didn't pan out, but it's definitely the failure to kind of realize a set of ideas. Now, what you can do with that failure, the cliche about learning from your failures and building on that later is of course up to you personally. But for me, it's definitely a kind of a failure of the system, if not necessarily an individual or a institution.
I think I'm not refuting that. To me, what's interesting about the unbuilt stuff is, what you wrote in your what you spoke about in your conversation with Anupama. And I think that's the bit that's very interesting for me in the whole book is I'm still stuck to my paradigm of the said and unsaid. So it's all the unsaid stuff, all the processes that were unraveled. So different people, like you really, spoke about this repository of ideas that get built, and it's that idea of sundoku. I loved it. The idea of the books piling up. I mean, I'm completely like that. So and my wife keeps saying, why do you have bloody 10 books lying by you? But don't read any of them. I just keep,
I know. Yeah.
I've got this thing, I've got to read these books, and they keep kind of
Yeah.
piling up. And I keep picking them and reading from them. And I mean, they make so much sense sometimes.
Correct.
And, sometimes I just put one down and read the other. And I think that's what the book is for me, is I think to that degree where it deciphers. I mean, I'm not one for theoretical discourse. I'm very uneducated in most matters pertaining to architecture and design. So for me, it's very direct, applied. I mean, that's how I relate to projects. So this idea of the evolution of knowledge, and that's what is happening within the practice, and the idea of being able to relate to that repository of knowledge as a source of being able to inform something at some point. What I do struggle with, Sameep, and maybe this is something that I'd love to hear from you, and this is something we struggle with in the studio, is so we do this one session a month or every 2 months, where we try and dig up some old project, built or unbuilt, maybe 10 years ago, and kind of share it with the studio, because there's so many new people there all the time. And the other day, Ankur and I opened some old archives, and I said, shit, man, we've got like so much stuff we didn't build, and all these great ideas, and how much, what a pain it was to develop this, and we must kind of dig them out. And so, this idea of this repository, it's kind of somewhere there in the subconscious, but we have no very way of documenting. I mean, we have no way of accessing this repository, right? At least we've struggled with it. It's not about the drawing, it's not about the detail. I mean, each time we do a door jam, and we start drawing it, and we've never bloody done it before in our life, And you say, why the fuck? I mean, why are we doing this? I mean, I'm sure. But then somehow, that's also part of the evolution. So, I mean, I was still kind of struggling. It's more a question and putting it out there. How do you deal with it? Like, this idea of the repository, you turn to it, you have a process, or it's just what's there in your subconscious and you pull it out because you remember it, or does the studio have access to this repository, and how do you use it?
Yeah, so I mean, actually, what you said is so kind of bang on, because it's a conversation that we have all the time. Sometimes we are, like you're saying, surprised when you look back at your projects and you go, boss, we've done some nice stuff. Yeah, I mean, why didn't we, ever kind of go back to this? Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. We don't really have a system, and also, I really, really kind of, like, I'm sure you do too, enjoy the process of getting to a point where the project goes into building, right? I mean, I like that entire process, perhaps more than the actual build project itself. I really enjoy that. And, maybe that's one thing that kind of holds us back from going back into the repository, that, I'll shortcut that process, and, I won't have that much fun on the project anymore. It might make life easier, but it won't be that much fun. So I think, yeah, I think that's the only reason why we don't tend to go back as much as we should, really. And maybe within our practices as well, the Unbuilt actually is a huge, maybe a publication that each one of us should do for ourselves to kind of reprise all of that. But yeah, man, it's exactly the same. It's actually exactly the same. And maybe, sometimes I think that just that Sundoku, the same kind of formula that you have for books that I was mentioning, you also kind of maybe have that for projects that are unbuilt, that at the right time that that idea will again kind of present itself to you, where you kind of get to a context which has a similar kind of position, and you kind of think about this idea, and then you remember, yeah, maybe we tried something like this 10 years back. Then you go back, dig that up, and that idea then finds life again. Maybe there's something to that. I mean, that sense of kind of detachment, but then finding it when it's most appropriate. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. Melissa, what about you?
Melissa?
No, I agree. I mean, we have the same experience. It's like you're talking about our practice too, from door jams to repositories. We always think, because it's like you remember this one particular way that you dealt with light on a project 7 years ago, and no one in the office remembers it because they're too new. And so then we have to dig back into it. But I think also what you started with, Sameep, is this the unbuilt is a failure. I feel like there's also like there's different levels of unbuiltness, from a concept proposal to one that was worked out all the way to, you know, details, working drawings, and then didn't happen. And the sets of negotiation, at least what I find really interesting, is those sets of negotiations. Anirudh's question talked about the finance and the materials, but I think those are the things that make architects particular to other professions, is that you're negotiating. Like, I mean, I guess I think that is the architecture also. And so for us sort of going through, that's why it's very hard to get beyond built projects or projects that are supposed to be built, because we just, I mean, we forget about everything. We always prioritize what we're building, and don't take the time to work on the things that are already dormant. I mean, we call them dormant or dead in our file system, which is maybe a bit morbid, but I think that question of negotiation and adding new layers, to me, is one of the most challenging and more exciting parts of the project. Is that fair? Even though I hate giving up the potential every time you have to make a decision, but I guess I like to live in that conflict.
So yeah, Sameep, on one hand, you are saying that Unbuilt is a failure. And I'm reading out from your dialogue with Anupama over here. It says, to me, the idea of Unbuilt is not about a singular project. Rather, it is kind of an evolving project. It is about developing a body of work and the continuities that one can have in the practice. The idea does not restrict itself to a particular site or client, but keeps evolving and informing other projects as well. And at one point, you also mentioned that Unbuilt projects build you, like build an architect or designer. The Unbuilt is sort of a beginning where an idea is born and developed further through a project or projects.
Yeah, so to kind of, it's not really a kind of contradiction in that sense, because if you ask me my preference of building myself, which one would I prefer, through unbuilt projects or those projects being built? I would prefer projects being built, right? But if they're unbuilt, then there is something that you must be able to kind of sieve out as an essence or a kind of learning to then inform you when you go 2 steps or go to the next project, right? So you move from one idea to the next, and then that idea evolves into the 3rd version of itself, and 4th and 5th. But what tends to happen sometimes also, and which is what was exactly the conversation that we were having a little bit earlier, is that maybe when you're down to 10th generation of your learnings from your failures, the 1st generation has been forgotten completely. And there in that repository also it becomes kind of important. But for me, again, when I was talking about a failure, I meant that there is a systemic failure. There is a failure of something in the system. It's not a failure of the project. It is a failure of the kind of ecosystem that kind of creates a project. The project obviously would not have been a failure if, in that sense, if it had been built. It could still have failed as a project in itself. But to get to the point of it being built, it would have moved out of that unbuilt realm, as the book kind of positions it. So the fact that it didn't get built is, for me, the kind of a failure of a system, not of the project per se.
Not of the practice.
Not of the practice. It could be because of the practice. It could be because of the client. It could be because of bylaws. It could be because of economics, whatever. So it could be because of any other factors, all of the factors maybe as well. So, but yeah, it's not the failure of the project, because, like I'm saying, the project, when we talk about the project, it's about the idea, right? I mean, it's not about the it's not about the other aspects. It's really about the unbuilt as an idea. So the survival of the idea is implied in the way that the practice is contiguous, and it's not about one moment in time and shifting to another moment, right? I mean, it's something that informs the next.
Sure. So we have 2 people and 2 questions over here. So Kshitij, why don't you read out this question or speak with
it's better that way. Yeah, I mean, they can
completely
ask.
fine.
Yeah.
And then we have Sabu Francis also waiting. He wants to share something.
Sabu's an old professor of mine. I should ask him questions. He doesn't need to.
Kshitij, you are there? or I can read it. Okay, so I'm
yeah, he's there. Yeah.
sorry, yes.
If you can read it, it would be really helpful because I'm still sitting in my studio and working, and by the time I'm
Kshitij, you're
listening to
getting
the talk as
full
well.
brownie points. Kshitij works with me, so he's got
Oh
brownie
my
points for
God.
sitting in the studio.
Oh my God. I can see there are two people who work with you on this call. Huh? There's Kshitij and there is Subham as well. So
And Anirudh,
and Anirudh,
who asked the
boss,
previous question.
this is like great, yeah. Very good. Very studious bunch. Anyway.
Yeah, Kshitij.
Yes. I was asking, in a creative field like architecture, would a physical manifestation of a project be considered a success for a practice, be it a private practice or exploring practice? Should that be the criteria to be judging a practice? Isn't exploring different projects or the unbuilt projects be considered in a creative growth of a practice? No, absolutely, it should. I mean, that's what I was saying, that the unbuilt aspect of a project should not be seen as a failure of the practice. It might be a failure of the ecosystem or the environment that the project will be realized, could have been realized under, but it need not necessarily be a failure of the practice. Yeah, I mean, the ideas kind of stay. Hey, but anyway, you can ask Ambrish this when you meet him in studio, no? Anyway.
But the thing I think also, Kshitij, is the question, where is it coming from? I mean, it's this idea of success or failure is also a relative one, right? I mean, if you seek validation, when you say the success of a practice, success for whom, from whose eyes, who's declaring the practice successful or unsuccessful? There's so many questions that come up. So I think why you asking this question is something you need to address first, is what point of view do you have? I mean, and where you standing, and who's measuring success or failure? I mean, it's so many viewpoints. So.
Can I jump in there though? I think I think I think we can give a lot of latitude to to when a project could be built, because like science fiction, if you look at literature, is about things that are completely speculative at the time that they're written, but now if we read them today, we can translate those into different technologies and things that we use all the time. I mean, the classic one is the I think H.G. Wells was writing about, I forgot about the newspaper that you would read every morning, where you could read all the newspapers of the world, and it's an iPad. I mean, it's a tablet. We have that. So I think there's also there's many different categories that we can see the failure, whether it's the failure of existing technology or the failure of a political climate or the failure of the economics of the ecosystem that somebody was talking about. But I think that in the end, I think it's hard to make a speculation as an architect that is not eventually intended to be built in some form, even if it's a competition entry where you're not actually proposing it to win as a buildable project. But I think that agenda, I mean, I don't know, this is kind of what I feel, maybe it's the naive optimism of architects, but I feel like at the end of the day, we're all trying to do something. And it always involves making. So even if the trajectory that we're currently focused on is really is really far removed from the making of it, I still think that in the back, like at the root of it or at the core of it, there is an idea that this could be built somehow, someday. And I think that's what drives the thinking about all of our projects. At least that's how I see it.
No, I just like to add something, is, if we zoom out a bit, and there's this idea that architects need to build, but if we were to look at our roles as problem solvers, so the thing is, we're given a set of tools, and the buildings we design is solving a problem, and it's solving a problem at multiple levels, depending on what values we infuse in it. So at a very direct level, it might be a brief from a client, but what we do for it is we layer it with other values, which then we are also solving for concurrently. And to that degree, if the unbuildable in some way is addressing a problem and is opening up a conversation towards a solution to a problem, I think what goes missing very often is in our desire to put something out there, we often lose sight. Have we framed the problem and reframed it and framed it in multiple ways? And what is it we're actually trying to solve for? And I find that all the time in projects in the studios, we start with something with an intent, and then midway through you get so carried away by your own process and where it's leading to and the beauty of it and whatever it might be, that do we go back and keep asking ourselves, what are we solving for? And to that degree, I think the line between the built and the unbuilt is unbuildable as well, can be more blurred, because some of Ayaz's sketches to that degree are throwing open questions. They are social problems or political problems or socio-economic problems. And to that degree, what is very interesting is that they open our minds to concerns that we could be solving and for. And our tool to solve for those is building, as architects. So it's a bit of a, when all you have is a hammer, then you keep going around looking for nails, right? It's a bit like that. So we need to be careful. Like we've done that so many times, and that's, something that happened in the studio. A client comes to us and, he says, and he wanted to redo a whole retail identity. And I sat with him for a couple of hours, and it was a large series of, multiple stores, and it was very lucrative. And he was convinced he needed to redesign the stores. And during the course of the conversation, I managed convincing him that it wasn't his stores that were the problem, but his product and his marketing strategy. And so it needed to, and then he said, thank you so much. Actually, I don't need to renovate all these stores, and I need to look at my product itself. And to me, it was very fulfilling. And maybe from an architect's point of view, I made a buildable project unbuildable or irrelevant. But I think we also need to take the onus of being cognizant of the problems we're trying to solve for. So whether it's repurposing buildings, so what are the agendas that are driving us? Are we solving? And to me, that all that forms also a part of this. Built unbuilt to me is relatively unimportant in the larger scheme of things. It's not. I don't. Yeah. I don't know if that made sense, but
yeah. So
I think that was fantastic.
Yeah.
In fact, I think your next book, Rajesh, should be irrelevant first version of irrelevant, and see how many entries you get, people sending in for that. But that's such a beautiful story, Ambrish. I really am. Yeah, man, that's excellent. That's excellent. But yeah, sorry, Raj, you were saying something.
Yeah. So there are a couple of questions. One from Jagdish Jani, another from Anshu Darbari. And then,
I thought Sabu had a question.
Yeah, before these people, I share these questions from these people, I would request Sabu to share what he wanted to talk about.
Thank you, Sameep. Nice seeing you. Thank you, Rajesh. I hope I'm audible. I just thought I'll mention a very interesting, since you're talking about Buddhism and all that. Here is a verse which I use it as the splash screen of my design software, which I wrote. It's called TAD. I think Rajesh knows about it, and I think Sameep also knows about it. So I'll just read it out. It's from Tao Te Ching. It says, 30 spokes share the wheel's hub. It's the center hole that makes it useful. Shape clay into a vessel. It is a space within that makes it useful. Cut doors and windows for a room. It's the holes that make it useful. Therefore, profit comes from what is there, and usefulness comes from what is left unbuilt.
Wonderful.
So that, the thing about my obsession for last 30 plus years has been the interplay between the built and the unbuilt. And I developed this fractal representation system. I developed the maths behind it. And I can talk about buildings literally in kilobytes, but that's a very interesting story by itself separately. I request all of you to see if you can support my magnum opus in some form or the other. It's a free software. So it's something which I've been trying to, tell people that you have to always balance fractally between the built and the unbuilt. When architects work, we have this heartache of deciding what needs to be left alone and what should be then built up. So it's a toss off between what you say, the opportunities you promote and the opportunities you demote. And I like Ambrish's point, because a similar story happened to me. I was the architect for Churchgate Railway Station extension, and I stopped the work. I said that you don't need the extension because you'll just create more concrete over there and nothing more than that. So probably my best work is something which I deliberately decided not to do. So same thing happened when I did the central headquarters, or didn't do the central headquarters for Konkan Railway. So these are all interesting things. I think when you talk about the unbuilt, you have to talk about it at many scales of examination. And it is something which we need to continuously keep reflecting on, because I think the world has got just too much of built matter around, and a lot of it ends up just creating more carbon footprint and whatnot. And that's the headache which we have. So that's a point which I thought I should get across. So it's pretty interesting to interplay between these two things. Anyway, thank you so much. I don't want to take up more time.
Thank you, sir. So, Jagdish, you would like to talk about your thoughts, which you have shared on chat?
Maybe just I can just read it out. Okay. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. So
yeah, I think I fully agree to Sabu. I think he made a lot of sense. We need to, in fact, start thinking about how we can deconstruct, how we can remove construction. I think that's the kind of discipline we should all get into, and that's why I referred this idea that we should have invited a lot of other disciplines into this discussion. Otherwise, it's too bias to construction all the time. I think, like I said, should I read that? Is it readable?
If you could read that, it would be really good.
Yeah, between the binary of an idea and manifestation, I'm very consciously writing idea and not unbuilt, and manifestation and not built. So I think that's where my basic difference of the title itself begins. Between the binary of an idea and the manifestation of it, there lies infinite extrapolated forms. An installation, a model, an hologram, a town square of a spaghetti western set, a Piranesi is Rome, Lakshagriha of Indraprastha, a pitchway depicting Govardhan shelter. Idea is the very foundation. It's a manifest, and in that sense, its abstract nature allows it to traverse across all the disciplines, and that's the beautiful part of it, of an idea, and that's the purpose of an idea. So I think we should give that more importance, and that's where the entire strength of an idea lies. Manifestation is always diluted in whichever way you say. It's always a dilute. But so the idea has to be preserved in its most potent way, so that dilution doesn't become more dilute. If you have an idea which is diluted, the manifestation is even more diluted or polluted. So I think and the whole idea of built also becoming unbuilt. There is always a life to a build, 100 years, 200 years, or even less. I think why not start defining, just the way we define that vehicles have to go off the road in 15 years. Why not architecture going off the site? We define that a particular building doesn't last more than 40 years or 50 years of its life. Depending, I mean, it can be thrown open to an argument, but it opens up a whole different notion of built and unbuilt altogether. I mean, we are too much still in the mode of Taj Mahal. I mean, we just have to document it. Simple, and if it just vanishes one day, it's fine. Why just make or any other monument? Let's not talk about Taj Mahal. I mean, that's a very symbolic. My whole point is towards that Sabu made. We are building too much, and we are giving too much importance to build, and we are giving too much importance to architecture. I think it needs to be relooked. I mean, We have to look at it again.
Uh,
And altogether, I think we just have to sit with a lot of other people. We just don't have, I don't think we should sit in our own, a cocoon.
Rajesh, I just had a suggestion. It's very valuable what Jagdish shared, but there are a lot of people in the room, and I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of ideas. But perhaps because this was directed more towards questions, if there are any questions, we could take those first, and then opinions and ideas would be welcome, I would imagine, because there would be a lot. But then, since we are here, on the panel, maybe if someone has a question, we could address that first, if there are any.
So
we also start wrapping up.
has something to say, I guess.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. So, listening to the conversations today and yesterday, so my question is, can we think of the unbuilt projects as evolving ideas that inform the process of enhancing social and cultural values through a critical lens, like essays? And in such a way, so the second part of the question is, in such a way, can we think of these unbuilt projects or the ideas as great important ideas because they have the potential to be given life, maybe if not at the moment, but sometime later, because they are giving us the value, the importance of what a society or our urban places can be in terms of social, cultural, economic, those aspects. So that's my question. Thank you.
Melissa, you should take that.
I think that's yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that one, but I think that that's actually a too narrow of a way to look at what is unbuilt, or I don't think that we necessarily need to apply those ideas to unbuilt projects. I think that all of those concerns that you talked about are equally as much a part of the building process. And I guess that someone can stop me if I'm not making sense, but I was just sort of trailing off when you were asking the question and thinking about how the what I like about practice in architecture is the messiness of it, that there's not, that it's really difficult to have ideological purity when you have projects that are driven out by others than just you, when there are so many different constraints that need to be dealt with, and that's probably better for the longevity of the practice, and more akin to the way that things work in the world, because sometimes there's I'm always very suspicious of ideological purity, and of sort of very focused and refined ideas. So I think that what you're asking about is absolutely a part of the process, and maybe it's part of the unbuilt in the way Ambrish was talking about it earlier, that it's these values and agendas, but I think they're also sort of built into the practice. I'm not sure we can separate them apart. Sameep, Ambrish, your thoughts?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to say one very quick thing about the removal of buildings that disappear. I think there's something that we need to recognize. That material is physical, and it has destructive capacity. So this idea that buildings can live for 30 years and disappear is a very fun one, but that's how it functions. Like in the US, that's how most residential buildings function, commercial buildings. You design them for 30 years and tear them apart. That also has an impact. So things that stay, like one of the things that advocates for resilient practices is that the most sustainable building is a building that exists. So there's also that question of time and what we think about whether we're building or unbuilding, sort of literally, I think is one that we have to consider the material reality and nature of what we work with.
So Ekta is here. Ekta wants to share something. Ekta, you are there? I think she left a chat message over here, and she just joined.
Just on this aspect of buildings disappear, it's not related. I mean, it's not conceptually related at all, but it's a really funny story. I don't know if you know Taniguchi, right? The guy who did the MoMA in New York. So when he presented to the board of MoMA, he said that, if you guys raise a lot of money, I will make a great building. And if you raise really a lot of money, then I will make the building disappear. So, I mean, that's like, it's just a side story. Just kind of remember that. It was funny, but I mean, he was really appalled by the pathetic finishing on that project. So, but anyway, that was Till Ekta kind of asks a question.
So Ekta, can you hear us?
Yeah, hi. So I was just thinking that the unbuilt can be looked at from the perspective of, should we actually be building all the time? Like, I think Ambrish was saying that, and like practices that are involved in conservation and sustainability would in fact, advise us to unbuild or rather build less than, yeah, that's just a thought.
Yeah, I actually just wonder whether being conscious of what you build is perhaps as important as not building at all. I mean, because what's going to happen, like Melissa was very rightly pointing out, that there's a material ecology that any building has, right? And even let's say the conservationists and when you're doing adaptive reuse, you're arguing for the fact that you do not create more dependencies on resources to build anew, but actually build with what you have. And I think that is building intelligently. You don't necessarily always have to choose not to build. I mean, if you can just, this is a question that we've also been kind of grappling, or what I've been trying to kind of think in my head is, what is the value that you add when you actually do something, right? I mean, what is the value that you bring to the world? I mean, really, really kind of ambitious, but maybe it needs to be tempered a little bit. But really, if you're able to create perceptible value, not kind of talking about aesthetics, about how beautiful it looks and all of that, but just leave all of that aside. Just a pure, just perceptible value. Is your building going to use? Is it naturally cooler than it would be? If it wasn't built in a particular way, right? Would you reduce the amount of AC that you use? I'm just saying, even simple things like that. What is the value that your building adds to the environment that you're building? What is the value that you add to the people who use the building? I mean, this idea of being carbon neutral, carbon negative, and all of that is one way to look at it. It could also be a part of the big kind of consumerist project. I mean, if there is a kind of conspiracy theory that kind of explains that too, but really, I mean, if we just think about what is the value that you create when you intervene, that should be a good enough way to critically ascertain whether if by building you're building sensitively or not. I mean, I don't know, maybe I've kind of lost a little bit of that comment there, but yeah.
No, but I think the first step, so Sameep, just on the same lines, I mean, again, what we do, I'll come straight to how we enter a project, is when a client comes to us and he's already has a building on a plot, and he's come with the idea of demolishing that building and building a new. We first critically examine whether we need to demolish the building at all, whether there's a way of just reusing what's there. Can we modify it, alter it, use as much of it as possible, even though that's something that he or might not have as an aspiration, he or she, because of an assumption which might come from wherever it comes from. So, I mean, it's just the whole sequence, what you also spoke about, the sequence of like, what problems are we solving for at every step? Are you critically examining your own work to see if it's adding value at every step? So, and each phase in the project allows you that opportunity to ask that question. And, whether it's socio-cultural, whether it's environmental, whether it's economic, and I think the idea is to continue to critically examine, be open to the question of value, really, whatever that might be, and continue to hold that lens throughout the life cycle of the project. And that's just it's just bringing some consciousness into every act we take, more so than ever today. I mean, we just need to do that. So should we wrap, Rajesh? I actually need to
So
get-
we have, I have, like Melissa has already asked, if there are more questions people can ask. We have last 5 minutes with us, and then we'll wrap, or even before that. And we'll just wait for a minute if there are more people asking, who want to ask any questions. If not, then I just have one last slide to show to people, and then I'll just say thank you to everyone. And this was really a good idea to open up this conversation to everyone rather than keeping it for only panelists and moderator. So Yamini has one question, which I think is, we'll just take that question. Yamini, would you like to speak instead of me reading out?
Viren also wants to ask something.
Yeah, I want
say
to ask
something.
Yeah, but please, Yamini, go ahead.
Yamini?
I was just typing the question when Ambrish sir actually said that there are a lot of buildings that are already there, which are milestone projects architecturally, which are being demolished, and there is something that is being rebuilt on top of that. So the same question or the same thought about whether we should choose to do something like that, or meaning the same thing.
So Ambrish, it has answered that. Is that what you're saying? Sorry.
Yeah, I was typing it when you said that. So
Yeah, that's the Zen nature of Ambrish. He preempted the question and answered it before you got that.
So he became motivational speaker.
Viren, sorry, you were saying.
Well, am I audible?
Yeah.
There is a little conflict that we deal in architecture with. If I put a comparison to other fields that deal with similar issues, say on one hand, we have the development or the evolution of a motor car, assume, which is made out of a lot of components, and it has construction and functional aspects. On the other hand, we have art. Now, if you go into the European realm of art and technology, you see a certain linearity in its development. See, every generation or every contribution that comes into the field of art or into technology does refine further with a certain set of agendas, refine further the past. Say, we know it from art. If you go to art, we have, say, pointillism. Then you have with Cézanne some abstraction that happens there. That goes further to cubism, and so on and so forth. So there seems to be a linear evolution. Along with that, of course, the entire industry of making paints and canvases and all that comes into picture. So it is a complex game, which finally seemingly is a linear process. Now, if you look at the motor car industry, you have there also a functional aspect and the aspect of beauty and the aspect of, say, comfort. So one could draw parallels between architecture and maybe making a car or doing a painting. So art and technology that we as architects always deal with. Now, and we have always to deal with people. So do people who do cars. They deal also with people. Now, there's something that architecture does beyond that. And I feel that what it does beyond is actually the real conflict in architecture, which makes us every time almost become an inventor. You know, every project seems to be a new project for an organization that deals with a piece of architecture. As if the client is new and it's the first time you're dealing with that person. And I feel this, therefore, that the idea of a unbuilt is very much the idea that comes up in a recent time. I don't think historically the idea of unbuilt was so pertinent as it is getting more and more in the modern times. I don't know when competition came up in the history of architecture. I don't know even if in India there were competition conducted if somebody got an assignment to do a temple, say like Sameep, or if you would get an assignment to do a township. I don't think there were the unbuilt ever put across. So it was always a built thing. Now, if you go to today, I think it has to do somewhere with the democracy that we are living in, that the more and more systems are getting democratic, the more and more there would be visions that are being put across, because the diversity actually puts across the idea of, and in architecture, not in other fields, in architecture, you sense that there are multitudes of ideas that are thrown in and that are not maybe sustainable for various reasons that we discussed today, for many, many reasons. So in art, I feel the conflict is similar. Not maybe in the car design, but in art, you have a similar issue happening, that the art is today so diverse that if art earlier had a function at the period of the caveman and thereafter and so on, as a piece of communication, but today art is so diverse, you don't know even what the real function of art is. Like, you don't know what really the function of architecture is. I felt it very interesting what Melissa had said initially, that we should see the function behind what we do. Even the book has a function, a purpose. And that's all what I wanted to say.